I am Sally, 32 years old, working as an accountant in Boston. I never thought I would see the day when my own father would point his finger at my face during our family dinner and say those words that still echo in my head. Return the $80,000 or do not come back to this house. My sister nodded in agreement, adding fuel to the fire. You took Mom's money. We all know it. The room spun around me as my family, the people I trusted most, turned against me without hesitation. I felt betrayed, shocked, and completely alone. Before I tell you about the moment I placed those bank slips on the counter and watched their faces go pale, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe so you don't miss more family stories like this one. My relationship with my family has always been complicated. Growing up as the oldest daughter of Harold and Dorothy Wilson was no easy feat. My father, a former bank manager with a reputation for meticulous attention to detail, expected nothing short of perfection. My mother, a high school English teacher, was gentler but equally invested in our academic achievements. Then there was my younger sister, Vanessa, 5 years my junior, and perpetually the family favorite. Our suburban home in Massachusetts looked picture-perfect from the outside. Well-maintained lawn flower beds that won neighborhood awards and family photos where everyone smiled right on cue. But inside those walls lived a different reality. Dad had mapped out our futures before we could even speak. For me, it was always business school followed by a prestigious financial career. For Vanessa, more flexibility was allowed. I still remember the day I brought home my first B+ in advanced algebra. Dad didn't speak to me for 3 days. Not angry words, not disappointment, just silence which somehow hurt more. Mom tried to mediate, but ultimately deferred to his judgment on most matters. This pattern continued throughout my childhood and teenage years. By the time I turned 18, I had perfected the art of meeting their expectations while slowly dying inside. I graduated valedictorian, secured a scholarship to a top business school, and followed the exact path that had been laid out for me. Meanwhile, Vanessa struggled academically, but excelled socially and in sports. She received praise for her efforts, while I received only the cold acknowledgement that I had done what was expected. When I turned 22, I made my first real independent decision, moving out and taking a job at a mid-sized accounting firm, rather than the prestigious investment bank my father had arranged. The resulting argument shook the foundations of our house. Dad couldn't understand my decision, seeing it only as defiance rather than self-preservation. Mom cried, but again sided with him. Only Vanessa seemed quietly pleased by the rift. Despite the tension, I maintained regular contact with my family. Weekly dinners, holiday gatherings, and occasional financial support when needed. I was determined to forge my own path while still honoring family connections. This balancing act seemed to work, at least on the surface, until 2 years ago when everything changed. Mom was diagnosed with an aggressive form of lymphoma. The prognosis was cautiously optimistic, but the treatment would be expensive and grueling. Dad, despite his financial background, was emotionally paralyzed by the diagnosis. It fell to me, the accountant, to organize the medical bills, insurance claims, and financial planning for her treatment. I took charge immediately, setting up payment plans, researching treatment options, and even helping Mom establish a medical fund where she could save for potential future treatments. I spent countless evenings at their house, after long days at my own job, sorting through paperwork and making sure everything was in order. I even took unpaid leave to drive Mom to chemotherapy sessions when Dad was overwhelmed. Throughout this process, Vanessa remained largely absent. She would visit occasionally, bringing flowers and staying for short, emotionally charged visits that left Mom exhausted. Her excuse was always the same. Her job as a marketing coordinator was too demanding, her apartment too far away. Dad never questioned her absence, but I noticed his increasing resentment toward me, as if my practical help somehow highlighted his own inability to cope. Mom eventually recovered her cancer in remission after 18 months of treatment. The medical bills had been substantial, but through careful management and the special medical fund, I had helped her establish the financial impact had been minimized. I thought this shared trial might have brought us closer, but instead, it seemed to deepen the existing divisions. Dad resented what he perceived as my taking control during the crisis. Vanessa seemed jealous of the time I had spent with Mom, and Mom herself, while grateful, seemed embarrassed that I had seen her at her weakest. The family dynamics shifted yet again with me, somehow cast as both necessary and unwelcome. My career had progressed steadily over the years. I had become a senior accountant specializing in personal financial management, I took pride in helping clients organize their finances and plan for their futures. The irony wasn't lost on me that I could fix other people's financial problems, but couldn't repair my own family relationships. Vanessa, meanwhile, had developed a complicated relationship with money. While outwardly successful in her marketing career, she frequently complained about being broke despite her seemingly lavish lifestyle. New clothes, weekend trips, and expensive restaurants featured prominently on her social media. Yet she often borrowed money from our parents without clear explanations of where it went. I had offered to help her create a budget several times, but she always declined, accusing me of being controlling and judgmental. Dad would defend her, saying she was just enjoying her youth. While I had always been too serious, these comments stung, reinforcing the narrative that had followed me since childhood. Sally the responsible one. Sally the boring one. Sally who needed to lighten up. Despite these tensions, I continued to manage Mom's medical fund, checking in regularly to ensure everything was running smoothly. Mom had given me power of attorney during her illness, and we had never formally revoked it since it seemed practical for me to continue overseeing the investments I had set up. This arrangement worked well until 3 weeks ago when everything fell apart. It started with a routine bank notification. Mom had decided to check her account balances, something she rarely did since I had been handling most of the financial management. When she logged in, she was shocked to find that $80,000 appeared to be missing from the medical fund I had established for her. Instead of calling me directly, her first call was to Dad, and Dad, rather than reaching out to me for an explanation, immediately jumped to the worst conclusion. The accusatory phone call I received that evening still makes my stomach clench when I think about it. I was preparing dinner in my apartment when my phone rang. Seeing Dad's name on the screen, I answered cheerfully, having no idea what was coming. Sally, his voice was ice cold. "We need to talk about the money you took from your mother." I was completely blindsided. "What money?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Do not play dumb with me," he snapped. $80,000 is missing from your mother's account. You are the only one with access besides her." He paused, his breathing heavy with anger. "How could you steal from your own mother? After her cancer, I raised you better than this." I tried to explain that I had no idea what he was talking about, that there must be some mistake. But he refused to listen. Every attempt at clarification was met with more accusations. He demanded I come to their house immediately to explain myself to the entire family. By the time I arrived, a full family tribunal had been assembled. Mom sat at the dining table looking pale and betrayed. Dad paced back and forth like a prosecutor preparing his case. And Vanessa, my sister, sat beside Mom with an expression that mixed concern and something else. Something that looked almost like satisfaction. I'll never forget walking into that room, the sudden silence as all eyes turned to me. I felt like a criminal entering a courtroom already judged and condemned without trial. Dad took charge immediately. "Your mother checked her medical fund today," he said. "And $80,000 is unaccounted for. As the person who manages that account, perhaps you'd like to explain where it went." Before I could even respond, Vanessa jumped in. She had printed out account statements and highlighted various transactions, creating a timeline that supposedly proved I had been gradually moving money out of Mom's account. "Look." She pointed to the paper with a manicured nail. 20,000 here in March, another 30,000 in April, and the final 30,000 just last week. "All transferred out with your authorization, Sally." Mom began to cry quietly. "That money was for if my cancer comes back," she whispered. "How could you take it? What if I need treatment again?" The room seemed to close in around me. I tried to explain that I would never steal from them, that there had to be a logical explanation, that we should look more carefully at the statements. But every time I started to speak, someone cut me off. Vanessa had more evidence. She produced emails I had supposedly sent authorizing the transfers, though they looked nothing like my usual communication style. She had bank slips with signatures that resembled mine, but weren't quite right. And she had already shared this collection of evidence with our extended family, as my phone was buzzing with concerned messages from aunts and cousins. I felt like I was drowning in accusations with no one willing to throw me a lifeline. The family dinner table where we had shared holidays and celebrations had transformed into a kangaroo court, and I was the only one who didn't know what crime I had supposedly committed. Dad continuously interrupted my attempts to defend myself. Each time I tried to suggest we contact the bank together or review the actual account history, he dismissed it as stalling tactics. Mom's tears flowed freely now, her shoulders shaking with each sob. The sight of her pain was almost unbearable, especially knowing I had done nothing to cause it. The most hurtful part was that not once did anyone in that room say, This doesn't sound like Sally. Not once did they stop to consider that in 32 years, I had never given them reason to doubt my honesty or integrity. Not once did they offer the benefit of the doubt to the daughter who had always been reliable, responsible, and trustworthy. Instead, they had constructed an entire narrative around my guilt without a shred of real evidence. Vanessa suggested I had gambling debts or a shopping addiction I was hiding. Dad wondered aloud if I was in some kind of trouble with dangerous people. Mom simply cried and asked why over and over. Why would you do this to me? I sat there stunned into silence by the barrage of accusations and wild theories. The family I had supported, the mother I had nursed through cancer, the father whose approval I had sought my entire life, the sister I had tried to connect with despite our differences, they had all turned against me in an instant, and not one of them was willing to hear my side of the story. The situation escalated quickly from accusation to ultimatum. My father stood up, his face red with anger, and delivered his final judgment. You have 24 hours to return every penny of the $80,000, he said, pointing a finger directly at my face. Or do not come back to this house. And if we don't see that money back in your mother's account by tomorrow night, we'll be calling the police. I felt the blood drain from my face. The threat of legal action took this family conflict to an entirely different level. This wasn't just about hurt feelings anymore. My father was threatening to destroy my career, my reputation, and potentially my freedom. Vanessa added her own threat, her voice calm and measured in a way that chilled me. I've already drafted an email to your company's ethics department, she said. I'm sure they'd be very interested to know that one of their senior accountants is embezzling money from her own family. I'll send it tomorrow evening unless the money is back where it belongs. My professional life flashed before my eyes. The years of education, the certifications, the long hours building my reputation, all of it could vanish with one accusatory email. I felt physically ill at the thought. Mom's reaction was perhaps the most painful of all. Between tears, she looked at me with such disappointment that it cut deeper than any angry words could have. I thought you loved me, Sally. I thought you cared. After everything we went through with the cancer, how could you do this to me? I left their house in a day-saze, barely remembering the drive back to my apartment. Once home, I collapsed onto my couch, too shocked to even cry. The accusations swirled in my head, each one more painful than the last. I hadn't taken any money. I would never steal from my family, especially not from my mother's medical fund. But they were so convinced of my guilt that they wouldn't even consider any other explanation. The loneliness of that moment was overwhelming. To have your entire support system, the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally, turn against you so completely is a special kind of abandonment. I felt hollowed out, as if something fundamental had been ripped from inside me. After an hour of sitting in stunned silence, I called my best friend, Lauren. Through broken sentences and occasional sobs, I explained what had happened. Unlike my family, Lauren's first response was exactly what I needed to hear. That's ridiculous, Sally. There's no way you would do something like that. There has to be an explanation. Her unwavering belief in me was the first ray of light in this nightmare. Lauren suggested I gather all the documentation I could find related to Mom's accounts and investments. Your family may not be thinking clearly right now, she said, but numbers don't lie. If you didn't take that money, the records will show it. I spent the entire night combing through digital records, emails, and the copies of statements I had saved. My accounting background served me well, as I created a detailed timeline of every transaction in my mother's medical fund since its creation. Somewhere in these numbers was the truth, and I was determined to find it. Around 3 a.m, my phone rang. It was my cousin James, the only member of my extended family who hadn't sent an accusatory message. James had always been the peacemaker in family conflicts, and I braced myself for his gentle suggestion that I should just return the money and apologize. But that's not what happened, Sally, he said, his voice low and serious. I need to tell you something. Vanessa has been talking about you to the whole family for months. She's been saying you've been controlling Mom's money, keeping her in the dark, and hinting that you might be using some of it for yourself. I was stunned. Why would she do that? And why hadn't anyone told me? You know how Vanessa operates, James replied. It was all subtle, just planting seeds of doubt. Nothing direct enough for anyone to think they should warn you. But looking back now, she's been setting this up for a while. This revelation shifted something inside me. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. The hurt I had been feeling began to crystallize into something harder. Determination. I wasn't going to just explain myself. I was going to fight back. By morning, I had a new resolve. I wouldn't beg my family to believe me. I would prove my innocence so undeniably that they would have to face the ugliness of their assumptions. And then I would decide whether people who could think so little of me deserved to be in my life at all. The 24-hour ultimatum my father had given me wasn't going to be enough time to gather everything I needed. I called in sick to work, something I rarely did, and focused entirely on building my case. I wasn't just fighting for the money anymore. I was fighting for my reputation, my career, and my dignity. My first step was contacting the bank directly. As I had power of attorney for Mom's accounts, I was able to request detailed transaction records for the past 6 months. The customer service representative was helpful, especially when I explained that there seemed to be some unauthorized activity we needed to track. The truth began to emerge from these records. The $80,000 hadn't disappeared at all. 6 months earlier, following the advice of my financial advisor colleague, I had moved the money from the low-interest medical fund into a specialized health savings investment portfolio. This move had been made with Mom's explicit permission. I even found the text messages where she had agreed to the change. The investment had been performing well with the original, $80,000 growing to nearly $92,000. All of this was clearly documented in quarterly statements that had been sent both electronically and by mail to my parents' house. Statements that apparently no one had bothered to read. But there was more to the story. The transaction records showed multiple attempted withdrawals from the new health savings account over the past month. Withdrawals that had been denied because they weren't authorized by either Mom or myself. Someone had been trying to access these funds using Mom's old login credentials, which no longer had withdrawal permissions for this particular account. I couldn't prove who had made these attempts, but I had my suspicions. The timing aligned perfectly with Vanessa's sudden interest in Mom's finances and her elaborate presentation of my supposed theft. To gather more evidence, I contacted Mom's oncologist's office. With the medical power of attorney still in place, I was able to get copies of all the bills that had been paid from the medical fund, creating a complete paper trail of how every dollar had been used for Mom's treatment recovery. The administrative assistant even wrote a letter confirming my role in managing these payments over the past 2 years. Next, I visited my own bank and withdrew my complete transaction history for the past year. If I had suddenly deposited large sums of money, it would show up here. Of course, there was nothing unusual, just my regular salary deposits and normal expenses. The picture was becoming clearer, but I needed to understand Vanessa's possible motives. A quick social media search revealed something interesting. While Vanessa portrayed a successful career and glamorous lifestyle online, there were subtle signs of financial strain. She had recently moved to a smaller apartment. Her usual vacation posts were absent this year, and she had started promoting affiliate links for extra income. A call to James confirmed my suspicions. Vanessa had confided in him about significant credit card debt, but had sworn him to secrecy. She had apparently been trying to secure a personal loan, but had been denied due to her credit score. The final piece of the puzzle came from my mother's email account, which I still had access to for managing her medical correspondence. There, I found several deleted messages from Vanessa asking for loans of varying amounts: $20,000, $30,000, and finally $50,000. Mom had gently refused, each time explaining that the money was reserved for potential future medical needs. The picture was now complete. Vanessa, desperate for money, had likely seen the large sum in Mom's medical fund as a solution to her financial problems. When she couldn't access it directly or convince Mom to lend it to her, she had fabricated this story of theft, using my position as account manager to cast suspicion on me. With all this information in hand, I contacted a lawyer friend for advice. She suggested documenting everything meticulously and presenting it calmly, focusing on the facts rather than accusations. She also advised me to protect myself by transferring management of Mom's accounts back to my parents, regardless of the outcome of this confrontation. I spent the next day organizing all the evidence into a clear chronological presentation. I made copies of everything. The investment documentation showing the current value of Mom's money, the text messages authorizing the investment change, the failed withdrawal attempts, the medical payment history, my own clean financial records, and Vanessa's deleted emails requesting loans. I also prepared emotionally steeling myself for what would likely be an ugly confrontation. I knew that even with irrefutable evidence, people often double down when faced with their mistakes. Vanessa would likely lash out when cornered. My parents might refuse to acknowledge how quickly they had assumed the worst about me. I decided that whatever happened, this would be a turning point in our relationship. If they couldn't accept the truth and recognize the harm they had done, I would need to create some serious boundaries for my own well-being. As the 24-hour deadline approached, I didn't call or text to negotiate for more time. Let them think I wasn't going to show up. Let them sit with their certainty of my guilt. The surprise would be all the more impactful when I arrived with the truth. I dressed carefully in professional attire, the same clothes I would wear to present to important clients. I packed all my evidence into a leather portfolio, got into my car, and drove to my parents' house for what I knew would be either the beginning of healing or the end of our relationship as I had known it. The entire drive, I rehearsed what I would say, not angry accusations, though I certainly felt entitled to them. Instead, I would let the evidence speak for itself, and then I would speak my truth about the pain their lack of trust had caused. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw all their cars parked out front. The entire family was waiting for me. Taking a deep breath, I gathered my portfolio and walked to the door, ready for the confrontation that would change everything. I rang the doorbell instead of using my key, a small gesture that signaled I no longer felt at home in this house. My father answered his face, said in hard lines, eyes cold and judgmental. He stepped back without a greeting, allowing me to enter what felt like a courtroom rather than my childhood home. The living room was arranged exactly as it had been the day before. Mom and Vanessa seated side by side on the couch, a chair positioned across from them like a witness stand. My father took his place standing behind Mom, a united front against the family criminal. Nobody spoke as I settled into the chair and placed my portfolio on the coffee table between us. The silence was heavy with accusation and expectation. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting for excuses, apologies, or perhaps a check to replace the money they believed I had stolen. Finally, my father broke the silence. "The 24 hours are up, Sally." He glanced at his watch for dramatic effect. "Do you have the $80,000 you took from your mother?" I looked at each of them in turn, taking my time before responding. Mom wouldn't meet my eyes, staring instead at her clasped hands. Vanessa's expression was a mixture of concern and something else. Nervousness, perhaps. My father stood rigid, playing his role as family patriarch and judge. "Actually," I said calmly, "I've come to clear up a serious misunderstanding. No money is missing. I never took a single cent from Mom's accounts. In fact, her medical fund has grown to $92,000. Dad scoffed loudly. "Do you expect us to believe that Vanessa has shown us the transfers? We've seen the evidence. Evidence that was selectively chosen and deliberately misinterpreted," I replied, opening my portfolio. "I'm going to show you exactly what happened to that money, and then we're going to have a very different conversation." Vanessa shifted uncomfortably on the couch. "That's not necessary," she said quickly. "We know what we saw. The money is gone and you're the only one who could have taken it." I looked directly at her. "That's not true, Vanessa, and I think you know that." For the next 20 minutes, I methodically presented the complete financial history of Mom's medical fund. I showed them the text messages where Mom had approved moving the money to the higher yield investment account. I showed them the quarterly statements that had been sent to their house. I showed them the current balance, $92,000, $12,000 more than the original amount. As I laid out document after document, the atmosphere in the room began to shift. Mom's expression changed from hurt to confusion. Dad's rigid posture softened slightly as doubt crept in. But Vanessa grew increasingly agitated, interrupting repeatedly with objections that made less and less sense. "You could have falsified these documents," she insisted. "When I showed them the investment account statements, you work with numbers all day. You know how to manipulate them. That's why I brought these," I replied, pulling out official bank statements with the bank's letterhead and security watermarks. "I also have the investment firm's contact information if you'd like to call and verify the account balance right now." Dad's still unwilling to fully concede. "Tried a different approach. Even if the money is still there, you should have consulted us before moving it to a different account. Your mother was worried sick when she couldn't find it. I was ready for this too." I showed them the text conversation where Mom had not only approved the investment, but had thanked me for finding a better return rate. Mom's face flushed as she recognized her own messages. "I don't remember that," she said weakly. "It was right after your last oncology checkup," I reminded her gently. "You were relieved about the good results and said we should make your medical fund work harder since you might not need it for a while." A flicker of recognition crossed her face. "That's right," she said slowly. "You did mention an investment opportunity. I forgot." The room fell silent as the implications of this admission sank in. I had been accused, threatened, and nearly reported to the police over money that had never been missing with authorization that had been given but conveniently forgotten. But I wasn't finished. I had saved the most revealing evidence for last. "There's something else you should know," I said, pulling out the records of the attempted withdrawals. "Someone tried to take money from Mom's new investment account 3 times in the past month. The attempts were rejected because they didn't have proper authorization. They were trying to use Mom's old login information." All eyes turned to Vanessa, whose face had gone pale. She stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. I don't have to listen to these accusations." She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. Dad, still processing everything, called after her. "Vanessa, wait. We need to understand what's happening here." "What's happening?" I said clearly. "Is that Vanessa has been trying to access Mom's medical fund. When she couldn't, she created this story about me stealing the money. I believe she needed it to cover her own debts." "That's a lie!" Vanessa shouted, whirling around to face me. "You've always been jealous of me. You've always tried to make me look bad to make yourself look better." Mom, finally finding her voice, asked the question I had been waiting for. "Vanessa, do you need money? Why didn't you just ask us?" Vanessa's composure cracked. Tears welled in her eyes as years of resentment and desperation poured out. "I did ask you. I asked for help with my credit card debt and you said no. You said the money was for your medical care. But you're fine now, and Sally gets to control everything. She always has. Perfect. Sally with her perfect job and her perfect budget. She gets to decide everything and I get nothing." I placed the final piece of evidence on the table. Printouts of the deleted emails where Vanessa had asked Mom for loans. Dad picked them up, his hands shaking slightly as he read them. "How much do you owe Vanessa?" he asked quietly. Her answer stunned us all. $887,000 in credit card debt and personal loans. Her expensive lifestyle, the weekend, trips, the designer clothes, all financed by credit she couldn't afford. She had been hoping to consolidate everything with a loan from Mom's medical fund. But when she was denied access, she had resorted to this desperate plan to frame me. As the full truth emerged, my father sank onto the couch beside Mom, the weight of their rush to judgment finally hitting them. Mom began to cry again, but these were different tears. Tears of regret and shame rather than hurt and betrayal. I sat quietly, letting them absorb everything. The vindication I had expected to feel was hollow. There was no satisfaction in watching my family realize their terrible mistake, only a deep sadness for what had been lost in the process. Finally, I spoke the words I had rehearsed on the drive over. "I've been part of this family for 32 years. I've always tried to do the right thing, especially during Mom's illness. I took unpaid leave from work to drive her to treatments. I organized payment plans with the hospital. I set up the medical fund to protect her future. I put my life on hold to help." My voice broke slightly, but I continued. "And yet, when Vanessa suggested I had stolen money, not one of you hesitated to believe the worst of me. Not one of you said, 'This doesn't sound like Sally.' Not one of you gave me the benefit of the doubt or even a fair hearing." I looked directly at my father. "You threatened to call the police on your own daughter without even checking the basic facts. You were willing to destroy my career, my reputation, everything I've worked for. All because it was easier to believe I was a thief than to question what Vanessa was telling you." Dad couldn't hold my gaze. He looked down at his hands, shoulders slumped in defeat. "We were wrong," he admitted quietly. "We should have listened to you." Mom reached for my hand across the coffee table. "Sally, I'm so sorry. I don't know how we could have thought. The medication sometimes makes my memory foggy, but that's no excuse." I didn't take her hand. The time for easy reconciliation had passed. "What I need now," I said, "is for you all to understand what this has done to our relationship. You can't threaten someone with police action one day and expect everything to be normal the next." Vanessa remained near the door, tears streaming down her face. Her deception exposed. She had nothing left to say. The sister who had plotted against me, who had been willing to see me disgraced and possibly imprisoned to solve her financial problems, couldn't even look me in the eye. I stood up, gathering my documents back into the portfolio. "I'll transfer management of Mom's accounts back to both of you tomorrow," I said to my parents. "You'll have full access and control of the investment account. I'll step away from all financial involvement with this family." Dad started to object, but Mom placed a hand on his arm to stop him. She understood at least that some damage couldn't be undone with simple apologies. As I headed for the door, I turned back one last time. "The most painful part isn't that you thought I would steal. It's that you didn't know me well enough to know I would never do that. After all these years, you still don't see me, and I'm not sure you ever will." With those words hanging in the air, I walked out of my parents' house, unsure if I would ever return. The days following the confrontation were a blur of practical tasks and emotional processing. True to my word, I transferred full control of Mom's investment account back to my parents, documenting everything meticulously and sending them comprehensive instructions on how to manage it going forward. I formally revoked the power of attorney, ending my legal responsibility for Mom's financial affairs. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from family members, my parents' repeated apologies, Vanessa's tearful voicemails, aunts and cousins, expressing shock at the true story which had now circulated throughout the extended family. I responded politely but briefly to most, making it clear I needed space to process what had happened. The only person I spoke with at length was James, who had been my lone family ally throughout the ordeal. He asked if I could ever forgive them. It's not about forgiveness, I told him. It's about trust. They showed me exactly how much they trust me, and now I need to adjust my life accordingly. At work, I requested a week of personal leave, something I rarely did. My boss, sensing something serious had happened, approved it without questions. I used the time to think deeply about what I wanted my family relationships to look like going forward. On the third day, Mom showed up at my apartment unannounced. Her eyes were red from crying, and she looked smaller, somehow diminished by guilt. I let her in, but maintained an emotional distance that was new to our relationship. We sat across from each other at my kitchen table, mugs of untouched tea between us. Mom spoke first, her voice unsteady. "I've been trying to understand how we got it so wrong," she said. "How I could have forgotten giving you permission for that investment. How we could have believed you would steal from me. I didn't offer reassurances or make it easier for her. I just waited, letting her find her own words. The truth is," she continued after a long pause, "I think I've always been afraid of disappointing your father. When he was so certain you had taken the money, it seemed easier to go along with it than to question him." She twisted her wedding ring nervously. "That's not an excuse. It's a failure on my part. I failed you as a mother." Her honesty surprised me. Throughout my childhood, Mom had been a mediator between Dad and us girls, but she had rarely acknowledged her own role in enabling his rigid expectations and quick judgments. When Vanessa came to us with those account statements, Mom continued, "Your father was immediately convinced, and I knew deep down that it didn't make sense. You've always been the responsible one. You've always taken care of us. But I didn't speak up." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with regret. "I let them believe the worst about you because it was easier than standing up for what I knew was right." This admission cracked the protective shell I had built around my heart. The hurt was still there, but now I understood something I hadn't before. My mother had been trapped in her own pattern of deference and fear, just as I had been trapped by my need for their approval. We talked for hours that afternoon, really talked in a way we never had before. Mom shared her own frustrations with Dad's controlling nature and her regret at not being a stronger advocate for me throughout my life. I shared how their quick judgment had confirmed the deep-seated fear that had always haunted me. That no matter what I achieved or how responsible I was, I would never truly be trusted or valued in this family. By the time she left, we had reached a fragile understanding. Our relationship would never be the same, but perhaps it could become something more honest with clearer boundaries and more mutual respect. Dad was a different story. He came by the following weekend, stiff and uncomfortable, in my apartment. His apology was formal and correct, but lacked the emotional depth of Mom's. He seemed more focused on putting the incident behind us than understanding the damage it had caused. "I know we made a mistake, Sally," he said, "but we've apologized. Your mother is beside herself. Can't we just move forward now?" It showed how little he understood. In his mind, an apology should erase the offense, and any lingering hurt on my part was simply stubbornness. I tried to explain that rebuilding trust would take time, that our relationship would need to change. He nodded as if he understood, but I could see the impatience in his eyes. The most difficult conversation was with Vanessa. After a week of avoiding her calls, I finally agreed to meet at a neutral coffee shop. She arrived looking uncharacteristically, disheveled, her usual perfect appearance, replaced by minimal makeup and casual clothes. "I don't even know where to begin," she said, her voice small and defeated. What I did was unforgivable. I was desperate about the debt. And when I couldn't access Mom's account, I panicked. And then one lie led to another, and suddenly, it was this huge thing I couldn't control. I studied my sister trying to reconcile the person sitting across from me with the one who had methodically tried to destroy my reputation and relationship with our parents. "Are you getting help?" I asked finally. "For whatever led to the debt and the lies," she nodded, wiping away tears. "I've started seeing a therapist, and I've joined a support group for compulsive spenders. It turns out I've been using shopping to cope with a lot of things." She hesitated, then added, "Including always feeling like I couldn't measure up to you." The irony wasn't lost on me. While I had spent my life feeling judged and found wanting by our parents, Vanessa had been measuring herself against an idealized version of me and coming up short in her own mind. "I've enrolled in credit counseling too," she continued. "Dad is helping me consolidate the debt with a personal loan, but I have to pay it back on a strict schedule, and I'm selling a lot of the stuff I bought. Designer bags, jewelry. It's actually kind of freeing to let it all go. I didn't offer forgiveness. That would come with time, if at all. But I did offer a path forward. I'll support your recovery," I told her. "I'll even help you create a realistic budget. But things will never be the same between us. You tried to destroy my life, Vanessa. That's not something I can just forget." She nodded, accepting this new reality. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said, "but I'm going to work every day to become someone worthy of your trust again, even if it takes years." The next few months were a period of careful reconstruction. Family dinners resumed, but with a different dynamic. I maintained firm boundaries, declining invitations when I needed space, and speaking up when old patterns emerged. Dad struggled with this new, more assertive version of me, but Mom seemed almost relieved, as if my standing up for myself gave her permission to do the same. Extended family relationships shifted too. Some relatives, embarrassed by how quickly they had believed the worst about me, kept their distance. Others made special efforts to reconnect, offering support and acknowledging their role in spreading Vanessa's false accusations. At work, I channeled my energy into a promotion opportunity, securing a position as financial planning manager that gave me more autonomy and responsibility. The professional confidence I had always possessed seemed to expand into other areas of my life. I found myself speaking up more in meetings, setting clearer boundaries with demanding clients, and trusting my own judgment without seeking constant validation. Ironically, the very event that had threatened to destroy my career ended up strengthening my professional identity. Having weathered my family's betrayal, office politics and client challenges seemed much less intimidating. I had faced the worst and survived. Everything else was manageable by comparison. 6 months after that fateful confrontation at my parents' house, life had found a new rhythm. The acute pain of betrayal had faded to a dull ache that flared occasionally, but no longer dominated my thoughts. In its place was a kind of hard-won wisdom about family trust and my own worth. The healing process hadn't been linear. There were days when anger would surge, unexpectedly triggered by a casual comment or a family photo. There were nights when I would lie awake replaying the accusations, the doubt in their eyes, the quickness with which they had believed the worst about me. But these moments became less frequent as time passed. Therapy played a crucial role in my recovery. My therapist, Dr. Martinez, helped me recognize the unhealthy family patterns that had set the stage for this crisis. My perpetual need to prove myself, my parents' conditional approval, Vanessa's resentment, all had roots that stretched back to my earliest memories. I wasn't responsible for these dynamics, Dr. Martinez reminded me, but I could choose how to respond to them now, and that choice didn't have to include pretending everything was fine, or returning to old patterns of seeking validation I would never fully receive. The most surprising aspect of recovery was discovering who my true support system was. Beyond Lauren and James' colleagues I had considered merely professional acquaintances showed up with genuine concern and practical help. My neighbor Martha, who I had exchanged little more than pleasantries with over 3 years, became a close friend after she noticed my distress, and offered her spare key in case I needed someone to check on my apartment during what called my family situation. These connections formed the foundation of what I came to think of as my chosen family. People who valued me for exactly who I was without expectations of perfection or demands for proof of my worth. With them, I could be authentically myself, sometimes organized and efficient, sometimes messy and uncertain, always worthy of respect, regardless of what I achieved or provided. My relationship with my biological family evolved into something new, not the close bond I had once yearned for, but not a complete severance either. We established a careful dance of engagement and distance with clear boundaries that I enforced consistently. Dad and I reached an understanding based on mutual respect, rather than his approval and my compliance. He made efforts to ask about my life without offering unsolicited advice. though I could sometimes see him struggling to hold back judgments. For my part, I learned to appreciate his strengths, his discipline, his intelligence, his occasional dry humor, without needing him to be the emotionally supportive father he had never been. Mom and I grew closer in some ways, our conversations more honest than ever before. She began sharing stories from her own life, opportunities missed due to fear dreams deferred to meet others' expectations that helped me understand her choices. We developed a new relationship as adult women with shared history, rather than simply mother and daughter. Vanessa's journey was perhaps the most profound transformation. The therapy she had begun for her spending issues expanded to address deeper insecurities and resentments. She moved to a smaller apartment, took on freelance work to supplement her income, and slowly paid down her debt. Most importantly, she stopped comparing herself to me or anyone else, finding her own definition of success. That had nothing to do with appearances or possessions. Our sisterhood would never be carefree or uncomplicated, but as months passed, we found moments of genuine connection that hadn't existed before. Small things, a shared joke, a book recommendation, a text checking in on a tough day, began to build a foundation for something new. The $80,000 that had nearly torn our family apart remained in the investment account, growing steadily for whatever future needs might arise. Dad managed it now, sending monthly updates to both Mom and me in a gesture of transparency that acknowledged past mistakes. As for me, the woman who had walked into her parents' house 6 months ago, ready for battle, was both the same and fundamentally changed. I still valued responsibility, still found satisfaction in organization and clarity, still believed in doing the right thing, but I no longer confused these qualities with my inherent worth as a person. The most valuable lesson from this painful chapter wasn't about money management or family dynamics, though I learned plenty about both. It was about the quiet power of self-trust. When everyone around me doubted my integrity, I held firm to what I knew was true. That inner certainty sustained me through the darkest moments and guided me toward healing. I also learned that sometimes the greatest act of love for others and for yourself is setting clear boundaries. By limiting what I would tolerate, I created space for healthier relationships to develop. Not everyone was willing to respect these boundaries, and that was information I needed about who deserved a place in my life. Perhaps most importantly, I discovered that my value doesn't depend on what I provide, what I achieve, or how perfectly I meet expectations. I am worthy of trust and respect simply because I am. This knowledge sits at my core now, unshakable by others' opinions or judgments. The journey from accused thief to self-assured woman wasn't one I would have chosen. But standing on the other side, I can recognize its gifts: deeper self-knowledge, authentic relationships, and the freedom that comes from no longer seeking external validation for my worth. Sometimes the most painful betrayals open the door to the most profound transformations. My family accused me of stealing $80,000, but what they really stole was my illusion that their approval defined me. In losing that illusion, I found something far more valuable myself. Have you ever been wrongfully accused by someone you trusted? How did you handle it? And what did you learn from the experience? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this journey resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories about navigating difficult family dynamics and finding your own worth. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the family you choose is as important as the family you're born into. Music.